In today's episode of the Simulator series, we are going to be creating a state manager for managing the player data on the client side. As always, if you guys do enjoy the video or it does help you guys out, make sure you smash the like button, also the subscribe button, and turn post notifications on if you want to get notified when I upload more Roblox development content. Additionally, I have a Patreon. If you guys like to support me and gain access to all the scripts and the game file that I make during this episode, there's a link down below in the description, and you guys can go and check that out. With that being said, let's hop right into it. Hopping directly into Studio, the first thing I want to do is explain what a state manager is and why we're going to use it. Now, we sort of already have a state managing system in our game. If we go inside of the server script service, inside of the player data, we have the data server script, and we also have the manager module script as well. Inside of the data server script, whenever a player joins our game, we are going to load their profile, which will have all of their player data inside of there, and then we're also going to create the leader stats for them as well. Now, the data belonging to that profile, so the player's data, is actually the player's state. So for instance, just so that we could pull up the player's data table, we're going to go inside of the replicated storage, inside of the player data, and now we have this template module script. And inside of here is just a template of what the player's data will look like. And instead of calling it player data, we could also call this the player's state. So for instance, when the player first joins our game, the state of their data is going to be this template right here. So when they join, they're going to have 0 clicks, 0 gems, 0 rebirths. The auto clicker is going to be set up like this. They'll only have a couple of rebirth buttons unlocked, and then their jumps will be 1 as well. Then of course, how we actually modify the player state on the server side is by using this manager module script right here, which contains all of the players' profiles that are currently in each specific server. And then we have a couple of different methods that we can use to adjust each of the players' data. So usually when we're referring to the player state, we're calling that player data. And like I said, inside of the player data folder, we have this manager right here, which allows us to modify and manage all of the players' data, aka their state. And throughout the past episodes, we've seen that we've been able to easily modify each of the players' data whenever we wanted to on the server side by just using this manager. Now, we should take a look at how we handle player data on the client. So if we go inside of the starter player service, inside of the starter player scripts, we have a couple of scripts inside of here. Let's just open up the GUI folder inside of the currency folder and open up the currency local script right here. Now, if we scroll all the way to the bottom of the script, we can see right here that we're calling the update currency method, and we're passing through clicks, and then we're also passing through remotes.getData, invoke server, and then an argument right here. And of course, what this remote should do is it should return a number based on how many clicks the player actually has according to the server. Now, in our Discord, I've seen an issue relating to this line of code right here quite a few times. And that issue actually results from this specific remote when we invoke the server. If we go inside of the manager, we can actually see when this function is called. So we say get data, and this is the function right here. Now, if the player first joined the game, their profile might not be loaded instantly. And the thing is that if the profile was not loaded, then we are returning nothing. So we're effectively returning nil. So when this currency script runs and we invoke the server looking for how many clicks the player currently has, if the player's profile is not set up, then we're going to return nil, which will cause an error in the update currency function. Now, that's one reason where our state manager on the client side will come in handy. Another reason is because when we have a state manager on the client side, that means that we're going to have a module script on the client side. So for example, we would have a module script inside of the starter player scripts, and that script will hold all of the player's data. So we won't need to use this remote in each of our different scripts where we want to get specific player data. Instead, what we'll do is we'll set up our state manager, and that state manager will handle getting the data. So that state manager will use a remote to get the player's data one time, and then once it gets the data, all of our other scripts can just access that specific module script instead of what they're currently doing, which is individually requesting data from the server. Okay, so with all that being said, I'm going to close out all of these scripts. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go inside of the replicated storage, and we're going to create a brand new folder inside of here, and we're going to rename this to client. And inside of this folder, we are going to add a brand new module script, and we're going to rename this to state. Then we can also rename the module inside of the module script as well, just like that. Now you might be wondering, why are we putting this inside of the replicated storage? Is there any specific reason behind this? The main reason for that is because when I created the module script inside of the starter player scripts and required them in the other local scripts while scripting out this specific video, I kept running into weird issues while trying to use the module script, and it was just different little errors that didn't make sense, but putting it in the replicated storage made it work perfectly fine. Now also, you might be questioning, putting a module script inside of replicated storage, will that be any different than putting it inside of the starter player scripts? What the replicated storage does is it allows both the client and the server to be able to share and access module scripts, for example. But in this scenario, that does not mean that the server has any impact on this individual module script. So when the player joins the game and any of the local scripts that require this specific module script, none of those will be affected by the server at all. So you can put into your own mind that there's basically no difference putting the module script inside of here compared to putting it inside of the starter player scripts. With that being said, we can now start creating our module. So of course, the first thing we want to do is get a variable for the replicated storage. Now that we've got that, well, let's go ahead and create a remotes variable, and that's of course going to be equal to the replicated storage.remotes. Let's also create a variable called template, which is going to be equal to the player's data template. So we're going to say require replicated storage.playerData.template, just like that. Then we want to create a variable called isDataLoaded, and that's going to be set to false by default. And then we also want to create a variable called playerData, and that's going to be of the type template.playerData. Still outside of our specific module, what we're going to do is we're going to create a brand new function, and that's going to be called loadData. Now, the first thing we want to do is we want to check if the data is loaded. And if for some reason it already is, then we're just going to return end just like that. But if the data is not loaded, what we want to do is we want to use a while loop, and we're going to say while not player data do. And of course, the first thing that you should be thinking every time we create a while loop, we want to make sure that we never forget to say task.wait, and then we're just going to say 1 second for right here, and that'll prevent basically Roblox Studio from crashing because of the while loop. Anyways, what we want to do inside of this while loop is we want to actually try to set the player data variable, and the way that we're going to set that is by using a remote. Now we actually have to create that remote, so we're going to go inside of the remotes folder, and we're going to create a remote function, and we're going to rename that remote function to GetAllData. So now back inside of the script, we can say remotes.getAllData, invoke server, just like that. Now, of course, we haven't set this remote up on the server side yet, but we will do that shortly. So while the player data is not loaded, every single second, we're going to be calling this remote. And once we get the player's data, this while loop will actually break, and then the function will continue down here. So once we do get the player's data, we want to set isDataLoaded to true, just like that. And now that we've created that function, we can go ahead and actually call that function right below where we created it. Now, let's go ahead and actually set up the GetAllData remote real fast. So what we're going to do is we're going to go inside of the server script service, inside of the player data, and open up the manager module script right here. Towards the bottom of our script, we are actually already using a getData remote function. So we're going to duplicate that line of code, and we're going to say GetAllData instead of getData. And then we're going to create a function. And the way that we're going to do that is by actually duplicating that function. We'll rename that to GetAllData, and then we can actually remove the second argument from that. And then all we're going to do is we are going to get the player's profile. And if we don't get the profile, we're going to return nothing. Otherwise, if we do get the profile, then we are just going to return the profile.data just like that. And now that we've created that function, let's make sure that we hook up that remote function to that function just like that. And now that's all good. So we can then close that manager script, and we're going to continue working on our state module script. Inside of the actual module, we want to create a function, and that function is going to be called getData. And this function is actually going to return template.playerData. Now, inside of this function, we're going to say while not isDataLoaded do, and then we're going to say task.wait 0.5. So if the data isn't loaded, this function is going to stall until the data is actually loaded. And if this function is called and the data is already loaded, it's just going to skip this whole while loop, so you don't even have to worry about that. So once the data is loaded, the final thing that we want to do with this function is we just want to return the actual player data just like that. Okay, so now for the most part, this script is finished. What we'll do is we'll go inside of the start player, inside of the start player script, open up the GUI folder, inside of the currency folder, and we're going to open up the currency local script right here. Then what we'll do right above the remotes variable is we'll say local state manager equals require replicated storage dot client dot state, just like that. And then we can use that variable that we just created, and we're going to come down to when we call update currency right here, and we're going to replace this remote function call with state manager dot get data dot clicks, just like that. And then we can do the exact same thing for the gems. So we'll say state manager dot get data dot gems, and there we go. We can also do the same thing inside of the GUI folder, inside of the currency folder. We have the Rebirth local script right here. So let's go ahead and create a variable for the state manager. That's going to be equal to replicated storage dot client dot state. And then right down here where we say update rebirths, instead of invoking that remote function, we're going to say state manager dot get data dot rebirths, just like that. So now to explain how the state manager works, we currently have two local scripts which both require the state manager script that we just created inside of the replicated storage. Now, any local script that requires the state manager and uses the get data method, depending upon if the data is loaded or not, that script is going to stall, because while the data isn't loaded, this while loop is going to continuously run, and it's just going to keep saying task.wait. And now the reason that we're doing this is because we can't define which scripts run first. So ideally, if we had a bunch of scripts inside of our starter player scripts, it would be nice if we can make one script load before all of the others, and then we could easily make our state manager that way. But since that's not possible, what we're going to do instead is any scripts that try to access the player's data before it's loaded, they're just going to pause right there until the player data is actually loaded, and then once the data is loaded and that script is able to get the data, then that script will just continue like normal. Now, the data not being loaded really only affects the player for probably the first couple of seconds while they load into the game. Every time after that, the data should be loaded and you should have nothing to worry about, but that's why we're doing it this way. Additionally, you might think that every single time we require this module script, this load data function will actually be called, but that's not true. If you're unfamiliar with how module scripts work, basically the first time our client ever calls this module script will be the only time where this load data function will actually be called. So considering we've just required this specific module script in both currency and the Rebirth local scripts, we're not sure if currency or the Rebirth script will load first, but that doesn't really matter. Whichever one of those does loads first will be the one which activates this load data call, and whichever one calls calls it second will not activate this load data call. That's just how module scripts work. So whenever this module script is called the first time on the client, what it's going to do is it's going to check if the data is already loaded, and we most likely don't actually have to do this check, but we're just going to do it anyway. Then while the data is not loaded, we're going to continuously request the data from the server, and eventually when we do get the data, this while loop will break, and then we're going to set is data loaded to true, just like that. And the reason that we're setting this to true is so that any of the scripts which actually loaded before the player's data was loaded in this manager right here will then break out of this loop, because is data loaded will be set to true, and then they're able to get their player data that they wanted. Hopefully that explanation works for you guys and it's not just really confusing. Let me know how I did in the comment section down below. Anyways, we can go ahead and close the currency and the rebirth local scripts. What we can then do is open up the jumping local script. And of course, inside of here, we want to create a variable for the state manager, and that's going to be equal to require replicated storage dot client dot state. Now, what we're actually going to do is we are going to delete this max jumps variable right here. And we also want to make sure that we delete this towards the bottom of the script. So we're setting max jumps right here, and we're going to delete that as well. And we also set max jumps right here as well, and we're just going to comment that out temporarily. Then what we're going to do is we're going to come up to the jump function right here, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a variable called max jumps, and that's going to be equal to state manager dot get data dot jumps. And then we also have to make sure that we rename the variable inside of this function. So instead of capital M, we do lowercase m, just like that, and there we go. So each time this function is called, it's going to access the state manager, it's going to get the player's data, and then it's going to get the amount of jumps that the player has, and that's what the max jumps variable is going to be set to. And then we want to come down to the remotes.purchase jump, and we're actually going to copy this and delete that from this jumping script right here. Then we're going to go inside of the state module script, and towards the bottom of the module script, we are going to paste this code. Now we actually want to modify this a little bit. What we want to do is we want to say player data dot jumps equals jump, just like that. So what we're doing is we're now listening to this remote event, and anytime this remote event is called, we're accurately updating the player's data, basically the exact same way that we were doing inside of this local script before. So before, inside of this local script, what we were doing was updating the max jumps variable, and now instead of having the max jumps variable just inside of this one local script, in a way we're updating the state on the client side so that every single script can have access to this information, and it's not just stored inside of one specific local script. And in addition to this, we actually forgot to do this with the currency GUIs. So we're going to go inside of our currency script, and we actually want to copy both of these remote calls right here, and we're going to paste them inside of the states module as well. And now what we're going to do is say player data dot clicks equals amount, and player data dot gems equals amount as well, just like that. Anyways, now that we've added those remote events to the state manager, we can go ahead and close the currency script and the jumping script as well, because we're done with that. We also want to make sure that we get the remote event from the Rebirth script inside of here as well. So we're going to grab that, and then we'll paste that inside of here, and then we can pretty much just copy this function just like that. And then of course, instead of saying gems, we're going to say Rebirths, and there we go. So we can then close the Rebirth local script, and we're done with both of those currencies. Next, we'll go inside of the Rebirth folder and open up the Rebirth local script. Now this one's going to take a little bit more work to actually update. So of course, what we want to do is we want to create a variable for the state manager up here. And now that we've got that, what we want to do is we want to look at this data table that we have right here. And actually, instead of looking at it, what we're going to do is we're just going to delete it just like that. Then what we're going to do is we're going to come towards the bottom of our script. And down here, we want to organize this just a little bit better because it feels like everything's kind of all over the place. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab the open button and exit button listeners, and we're going to move those to the very bottom of the script just like that. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to delete this line of code where we actually set the rebirth buttons of the data table that we had and we deleted. And then we're also going to grab this update rebirth function call, and we're going to paste that just above the update buttons cost. Now we have all three of these remotes organized, and we have all these function calls organized right next to each other, but we also want to move all these remote calls below the function calls just like that, and now it's much more nicely organized. So first things first, looking at our update rebirth function call right here, we're actually going to replace that remote function call with the state manager. So we're going to say state manager.getData.rebirths, and then also we're going to update our update buttons buyable function, so we can delete that argument right there, and then let's go to that function. This function is no longer going to accept an argument. The reason that it's no longer going to accept an argument is because it no longer needs an argument, and you're going to see why in a second. Everywhere in our script where we have the word data, it's going to be underlined in red because we deleted that variable, and we can fix all these pretty easily. So all we have to do is say state manager.getData, and then this one was trying to access rebirths, so we're going to say rebirths just like that. And we can also see that we have the word amount right here underlined in red, and we're also going to replace that with the state manager as well. So state manager.getData.clicks, and there we go. That function is now fixed. So then we go down to the generate button function, and instead of passing through data, we're going to pass through state manager.getData. And then if we go up, we have the update button cost right here, and all we have to do is say state manager.getData.rebirth just like that. And then we have data up here again, so all we're going to do is say state manager.getData.rebirth buttons and continue to index that with clone.name. And there we go. All of those issues are fixed. We have another one in the update rebirth function right here. And again, instead of update rebirth actually accepting an argument, we're just going to use the state manager for that instead. So we'll actually create a variable right here called Rebirth, and that's going to be equal to state manager.getData.rebirths, of course. Then we can use that variable and we can just say Rebirth, and we can remove this line of code where we're actually setting data.rebirths to something just like that. Coming back down to the bottom of our script, we still have all these remote events right here. We can go ahead and delete this line of code where we once again update that data table that we've deleted. What we then want to do is we actually want to copy all of these remote events and we're going to paste them inside of the state manager right here. Now we already have update clicks and update rebirth, so we actually don't need to add those to this, but we do need to add the update rebirth button. And all we have to do is say player data.rebirth buttons, index that with a specific rebirth, and set that equal to is unlocked, just like that. So of course, now that we added that event to the state manager, we're making sure that we keep our data in sync. What we want to do is go back to the rebirth script, and what we're going to do for each of these times that these remote events are fired is we're actually going to create a function inside of here, which does not need to accept any arguments, and we're going to say task.delay 0, comma, and now the function that we were originally calling, which is update buns buyable. Now we're going to continue to do that for each of these remote events, so task.delay 0 and pass through update rebirth, and then we also need to do that for unlock buns as well, so task.delay 0 unlock buns, and there we go. Now you're probably thinking, why in the world are we using task.delay? What is the point of this? So let's for example take a look at the update bun buyable function. When this function is called, we're not passing any information to it, and we can see that we're clearly using the state manager to get the specific data that we want, such as the rebirths or the amount of clicks that the player has. Now, the reason that we're using task.delay is because remember, this remote event update clicks is called both inside of the state module script right here and also inside of this local script right here. So considering we are not actually using the amount which is passed through this update clicks remote event, and instead we're using the data from our state manager right here, when this remote event is actually fired, we are unable to specify which script should have priority or should run first when a remote event is fired. So for example, when this remote event is fired, if we don't use task.delay and we just call the update buns buyable function, we're unable to confirm if the state manager actually updated the player's data already with the brand new rebirths that they got. But by using task.delay 0, that gives the state script enough time to react and update the player's data, so then once this function is called and we access the player's data, it will be updated because we waited those 0 seconds and gave the state manager enough time to update before the function which accesses that brand new data was actually ran. And you might be thinking, well, task.delay 0, you're not waiting anything at all. But with task.delay, the delay isn't noticeable at all to the player, but on a computer level, when everything is moving so fast, this gives the state manager enough time to update the data before we actually call this function. Now there's actually one more script that we need to update. If we go inside of the star GUI, inside of the click buns, and we open up this manager local script right here, if we scroll down to the bottom, we can see that we're using a couple of remote functions to invoke server and get data about the auto clicker buns. So of course, to fix this up, all we have to do is create a variable for the state manager up here. Now that we've got that variable created, what we're going to do is we're going to come down to here and we're going to say state manager.getData.auto. And since this is for the regular auto clicker, we want to say regular, and then we also want to say active because we're trying to determine if this auto clicker is active or not. Additionally, we can go ahead and just copy that code and paste it right down here. And instead of saying regular, we are going to say fast, just like that. And we have this remote event right here, which is update auto clicker. We want to make sure that we copy that, go into our state module script, and inside of here, we are going to go ahead and paste that in. Then of course, we want to make a function, and to easily create this function, we're going to go back inside of the manager and just copy these arguments right here. So we have the button type, and we can rename button type to auto clicker, maybe, I don't know, whatever you guys would like to name it would probably work as well. And now that we have that created, what we're going to do is we're going to say player data.auto, index the auto table with the auto clicker, and then we'll index that with .active, and we're going to set that equal to mode, just like that. Now, since we're calling the update button function inside of this script, whenever the update auto clicker event is fired, we of course do not need to use task.delay because this function is not using the data stored inside of the state manager. So now this is all good to go. And with all of that being said, we can close all those scripts, save our game, and start our game up and test this out. Okay, so currently in our game, I have 3k points. I don't have any rebirth, so I'm just going to rebirth real quick. So now our rebirth data, we have one rebirth, we have some gems, and then let's get ourselves some clicks as well. And now that we have some actual data saved, I'm going to go ahead and restart my game and start it once again, just so that we can make sure that all that data is loaded perfectly in the right order that it should be and everything else like that. So loading into our game, we can see that it takes a couple of seconds, but after a couple of seconds, our data is loaded. We have 10 clicks, we have 10 gems, we have one rebirth displayed down here. If we open up the Rebirth GUI, we can see that the rebirth is also displayed up there as well. The only other thing to test is the rebirth buns and the jump data as well, so let's do that. Okay, so I gave myself a ton of clicks, we've got some gems, I purchased a rebirth bun right there, and I've also got an extra double jump as well. So now when we load into our game, we want to make sure that the double jump data is correct on the client as well as the rebirth buns, so let's go ahead and check that out. So now that we're in our game, we can jump jump, and we can see we still have both of those jumps unlocked. And if we look in our rebirth, we can see that we still have that rebirth button. So that confirms that all of our data is loading correctly, which is perfect. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, we now have a working state manager on the client side. If you guys did enjoy the video, as always, make sure you smash the like button, also the subscribe button, and turn post notifications on if you want to get notified when I upload more Roblox development content. Of course, I have a Patreon if you guys like to support me and gain access to all the scripts and the game file that I made during this episode. There's a link down below the description, and you guys are going to check that out. With that being said, I'll see you guys in the next episode.